The smoke alarm in the penthouse boardroom of Aldercroft Capital went off at 9:04 on a Tuesday morning, and that was how Juniper Calloway accidentally saved $31 million. She hadn't meant to be in that room. She hadn't even meant to be on that floor. Juniper Calloway was 31 years old, perpetually 5 minutes late to everything, and possessed of an almost supernatural ability to walk into the wrong place at exactly the wrong time. She had been doing it her whole life. Wrong classroom on the first day of university, wrong car in a parking lot in Mississauga, wrong pew at a funeral for a man she had never met. Her mother called it a gift. Her former boss at the Temp agency called it a liability. Juniper called it Tuesday. The elevator had been the first mistake. She had pressed 14, the 14th floor, where Aldercroft Capital's Human Resources Department was holding interviews for a junior accounts coordinator. She had her resume in a red folder, a coffee in her left hand, and a travel mug tucked under her arm because she had not had time to finish the first one. The elevator had gone up. She had watched the numbers climb. She had not noticed until the doors slid open that she had pressed 41. The boardroom was directly across the hall. The doors were open. Juniper Calloway walked in because she thought it was a waiting area. The room was enormous, a long table of dark walnut, 12 chairs, floor-to-ceiling windows overlooking the harbor. There were 5 men already seated, all in charcoal and navy, all looking at a projection screen that showed what appeared to be a dense grid of acquisition figures. At the head of the table sat a man who was not looking at the screen at all. He was looking at his watch. He looked up. The coffee Juniper was carrying chose that moment to breach its lid. It ran down her wrist, across her palm, and dripped onto the portfolio binder she had just accidentally picked up from a side table, apparently thinking it was her red folder, and then onto the floor, and then, because the universe had a particular sense of humor. "I am so sorry," she said. "I think I have the wrong. Is this the 14th floor?" The man at the head of the table said nothing for a long moment. He had the kind of face that was very good at saying nothing. Dark hair, gray at the temples, jaw that looked like it had opinions. He was, she would later discover, 38 years old, and his name was Reed Ashmore, and he had not been surprised by anything in approximately 6 years. He looked at her standing in the doorway of his boardroom, dripping, holding a red folder in one hand and a leaking coffee in the other, wearing one dry shoe and one wet one, and something behind his eyes shifted in a way he would later deny. "It is not," he said. "Right," said Juniper. "Right, okay. I'm very sorry to interrupt. You've picked up our distribution summary." She looked at the binder in her hand. Aldercroft Q3 Acquisition Distribution. Confidential was printed on the tab. "I thought it was my resume," she said. One of the men at the table, a heavy-set gentleman she would later learn was called Douglas Price, senior vice president of something intimidating, made a sound that was not quite a laugh but was not quite not one either. "Could you put it down and leave?" said Reed Ashmore. His voice was very even. The kind of even that took practice. "Absolutely." She stepped forward to set the binder on the table, and her wet shoe slipped slightly on the hardwood, and she grabbed the back of the nearest chair, which swiveled, and her elbow knocked the open laptop sitting at that seat, and the screen that had been showing the projection changed. A new column appeared, then another. Reed Ashmore stood up. Not because he was angry, though he was in a controlled architectural sort of way, but because he was looking at the screen, really looking at it. "What did you do?" said Douglas Price. "I don't know," said Juniper honestly. "I barely touched it. You sorted the columns," said Reed Ashmore. He was walking toward the screen now, not toward her. "You sorted by acquisition date instead of filing date. I'm sorry, I can fix it." "Don't," he said it quietly, but with a precision that stopped her hand mid-air. He was looking at 2 columns side by side now, and something in his expression had changed entirely. The careful blankness was gone. There was something concentrated there instead, alert. "These 2 properties," he said, column F and column K. "The acquisition dates are 18 months apart, but the filing dates are the same week." Silence in the room. "That's not possible," said one of the other men, young, red tie, the particular anxious energy of someone who had prepared extensively and was now alarmed that the preparation was irrelevant. "It's not possible," Reed Ashmore agreed, "unless someone filed retrospectively. Or someone changed one of the dates." He turned from the screen, not to look at her. To look at the man in the red tie. Pull the original certificates, both of them. Now, the room became a different kind of quiet. Juniper Calloway stood beside the chair she had swiveled, holding her red folder, wearing one wet shoe and trying to determine the least disruptive moment to leave. "Sit down," said Reed Ashmore. She looked around. There was no one else he could be talking to. "Me? You sorted the columns. I need to know exactly what you pressed. It was an accident. My elbow caught the edge of the trackpad, I think, or the keyboard. Which key? I have no idea. Probably the spacebar? Or maybe. There was a column header. It was highlighted. I might have. You might have clicked a header. Yes, he looked at her for a moment with the full attention of someone who was very accustomed to using intention as a tool. What's in the folder, he said. Resume? For what position? Junior accounts coordinator, on the 14th floor. I pressed the wrong button in the elevator. She paused. I do that a lot, Douglas Price said very quietly. Reed, I know, said Reed. He had already turned back to the screen. The man in the red tie, his name was actually Callum. She would learn, though she'd already mentally filed him under red tie, came back into the room with 2 manila folders and spread them open on the table. Everyone leaned in. Juniper leaned back. Reed Ashmore found the discrepancy in 40 seconds. She knew it was 40 seconds because he had been looking at his watch when the man came back in, and he was looking at his watch again when he said, "There it is." The filing date on one of the certificates had been altered, not clumsily, professionally even. But the acquisition date was a ghost, an echo of a previous transaction that someone had very carefully tried to bury in a column that nobody sorted by acquisition date, because why would they, when all the reports were filed by filing date, which was the correct and logical way to organize a document, which was exactly why it almost worked. $31 million in a property acquisition that should have triggered a conflict disclosure. Hadn't, because the date said it happened after the relevant deadline. Except it hadn't. It had happened before. Reed Ashmore straightened up and looked at his watch again and then looked at the window for a moment and then said, to no one in particular, get legal on the phone. He looked at Juniper. Stay, he said. I have an interview, she said. On the 14th floor. When? 9:30. He looked at his watch. It was 9:14. I'll have someone call down, he said with the calm certainty of a man who moved very efficiently through obstacles, and tell them you'll be late. It was not a question. It was not quite a command. It was the verbal equivalent of a door being held open with a very deliberate hand. Juniper Calloway sat down. She did not know yet that she would not make it to the 14th floor that day, or the next, or the one after that. What nobody told her in those first strange hours was that Reed Ashmore ran Aldercroft Capital the way a very precise instrument runs, with minimal tolerance for deviation and maximum investment in process. His calendar was scheduled in 15-minute blocks. His assistant, a woman named Beverly Crane, who had the weather deficiency of a sea captain, pre-screened his calls and organized his lunch orders, and knew that if a meeting ran over by more than 3 minutes, he would be recalibrating the rest of the afternoon in his head with a quiet intensity that was alarming to witness. Juniper did not run like a precise instrument. Juniper ran like a washing machine with something wrong with the spin cycle, functional ultimately, but with a great deal of noise and occasional unexpected motion. She lost things, she found things, she tripped over power cords. She once managed to knock out the Wi-Fi in an entire floor of a building in Oakville by plugging a kettle into the wrong outlet, and the IT guy who came to fix it said he had never seen anything like it. And she said she had, actually, multiple times. And he had looked at her with an expression she was familiar with. She had always been this way. Phones flickered near her, printers jammed on her jobs first. She'd stopped wearing a watch in high school, after her third dead battery in 2 months. Her older sister thought it was hilarious. Her mother thought she just needed to slow down. The Temp agency had placed her in 14 different offices over 3 years, and 11 of them had experienced some form of minor technological event that could not be specifically attributed to her but that had, coincidentally, occurred within her first week. What Juniper did have, what she had always had even when everything else was in gentle chaos around her, was an eye for numbers. She could look at a column of figures and know, the way some people know a chord is slightly off-key, when something didn't sit right. She didn't do it consciously. It was more like peripheral vision for arithmetic. A number would be wrong and she would feel it before she saw it, a small snag in the texture of the data, and then she would look, and there it would be. Her father had been an accountant. He used to let her check his work when she was 9 years old, spreading papers across the kitchen table after dinner. And she had caught 3 errors in 3 months, which he told her was a record, and which she had felt unreasonably proud of for an embarrassingly long time. She thought about that sometimes when she was picking up temp work at financial firms, wondering if there was a version of her life where she had done something with it, gone further with it. But then something would short out, or she'd mix up a date, or she'd end up on the wrong floor of a building in downtown Toronto, and the wondering would fade into the background again. Reed Ashmore found out about the numbers thing on the 3rd day. He had kept her, Temporarily, he said, just through the current situation, just until legal had what they needed. In a small office adjacent to the boardroom, going through documents. It was not a job she had been hired for. It was not a job anyone had asked if she wanted. But Beverly Crane had appeared with a visitor badge and a stack of files and an expression that strongly suggested this was simply what was happening now, and Juniper had decided not to argue with Beverly Crane, because Beverly Crane was not the sort of person you argued with. She went through files, she organized. She flagged 3 things in the first day that turned out to be relevant. Not the same kind of relevant as the first discovery, but the small accumulated debris of someone covering a long-term discrepancy. The kind of thing that only showed up if you read everything. On the 3rd morning, Reed Ashmore came in at 7:52. She knew because she had started keeping track, partly out of curiosity and partly because his schedule appeared to be the organizing principle around which the rest of the office rotated, and found her at the small desk with 6 folders open and a printed spreadsheet with handwritten annotations in the margins. He stood in the doorway for a moment. "You annotated the spreadsheet," he said. "I used pencil. I can erase it. You circled the vendor code. The same vendor code appears on 4 different line items under 3 different company names. I don't know if that's a problem. It might not be. But it seemed like a pattern." He came into the room and looked at what she'd circled. He did not say anything for a moment, and she had learned by then that his silences were not like other people's silences. They were not uncomfortable or absent. They were occupied. He was thinking, and thinking was something he did the way other people breathed. "It is a problem," he said. "Oh, the vendor filed under 3 company names to stay beneath the disclosure threshold each time." She looked at the numbers. That's actually quite clever." He looked at her. "I mean, not good. Obviously not good." "No, I just meant structurally. I know what you meant." And then, barely, just at the corner, there and then gone, something that was almost a smile. "How did you see it?" "The numbers felt wrong," she said. "The totals were round. People don't usually land exactly on round totals. It's too convenient." He looked at her for a long moment with that focused attention he turned on things he found genuinely interesting. It was an unnerving amount of attention. It did not feel unkind. "Where did you go to school?" he said. "I didn't. Not for finance. I did a year of environmental sciences at U of T, and then I ran out of money and started temping. 14 placements," he said. She blinked. "You read my resume. You left it on my table. I left it by accident. Most things that happen in this office happen by accident, recently," he said. Not meanly. More like he was noting a data point he had not accounted for. Beverly Crane appeared in the doorway behind him and said, "Legal is on line 2, and your 9:15 is here." He looked at his watch. She had learned by now that this was not impatience, it was calculation. He was marking time the way some people mark a physical position, so he always knew exactly where he stood. "I'll be there in 3 minutes, he said. Beverly Crane nodded and disappeared. He looked at Juniper. "Finish the vendor cross-reference. Flag anything with a round total. Okay, and there's coffee in the kitchen. The machine doesn't." He paused. "Doesn't what?" "Nothing. Just. The machine has a particular sequence. Beverly will show you." He left. She would find out later. From Beverly, who delivered information with the flat precision of someone filing it away. Simultaneously, that Reed Ashmore had mentioned the coffee machine because the last 3 people to use it without being shown. The sequence had caused it to overheat, and one of them had briefly shorted out the display panel, and he had spent 11 minutes waiting for the system to reset. And 11 minutes was, in the organizational structure of his morning, a significant loss. Beverly had looked at her while saying this with an expression that suggested she was aware of the irony. The thing about Reed Ashmore, the thing she started to understand slowly, not all at once, was that his rigidity was not coldness. It was something else, something more like a house that had been built to withstand very specific weather. She learned this in pieces, from Beverly, who had been his assistant for 9 years and who said, during a quiet Thursday afternoon, that he had not always been like this, quite so much like this, though she did not elaborate and Juniper did not ask. From the way he moved through the office, quickly, without looking up from whatever he was carrying or thinking about, but with an awareness of everything around him that was almost physical, like he was tracking the location of every moving part, from the night she worked late, the second week when the legal team was pushing hard on the documentation, and he was still there at 9:15 and she came out of the small office to find him standing at the window of the boardroom with a coffee, not looking at anything in particular. She almost didn't say anything. "Do you ever leave?" she said instead, because she had never been good at knowing when not to say things. He turned. He didn't look startled. She wasn't sure he ever looked startled. But there was something briefly unguarded in the turn. "I was about to ask you the same thing. I wanted to finish the cross-reference, so did I." She leaned against the doorframe outside the windows. The harbor was dark and the lights of the city sat on the water in long, broken lines. "It's a really nice view," she said. "Yes. Do you actually see it? Or does it just become background?" A pause. "Becomes background. That's a shame." He looked at her. Not the analytical look or the focused look. "Something else. When did you stop wearing a watch?" he said. She looked down at her wrist, surprised. "High school. They kept dying dead battery, every few weeks. My sister said I have an electrical charge. She's a nurse, so she said it in a way that sounded almost medical." He was quiet for a moment. "My father had that. He called it electric skin. Did he lose a lot of watches?" 3 in a year. He gave up on them." She smiled. "What did he do for time?" Asked strangers. Said it started better conversations. It was the most he had said about anything personal. She filed it away carefully, the way she filed numbers, not looking at it directly. "You're nothing like him then," she said. "No," said Reed Ashmore, and there was something in the word that was not quite grief but was in the same postal code. "I'm not." She had a sense, with him, that certain things were load-bearing walls and you didn't knock on them to see what was hollow. "I'm going to get my coat," she said. Good night," he said. And then as she turned, Calloway. She looked back. The vendor analysis was good work. He said it the same way he said everything, without decoration. But it didn't need any. "Thanks," she said. She took the elevator down. She pressed the lobby button with her knuckle because her hands were full, and she watched the numbers descend. And she thought about a man who tracked time like a compass bearing, and a father who asked strangers and started conversations, and the 14 floors between them. The legal case broke open in the 4th week. The vendor, it turned out, had been routing payments through subsidiary companies for 2 years, with the cooperation of one of Aldercroft's own mid-level compliance officers. A man named Barrett, whom nobody had suspected because he was very quiet and very thorough and had a habit of fixing other people's errors that made him seem trustworthy rather than what he actually was, which was someone who could locate errors because he had put them there. Juniper's vendor cross-reference had been one of 4 pieces of evidence that built the case. She knew this because Beverly Crane told her, delivering the information with the same flat exactness, and then adding, "Mr. Ashmore has spoken to HR about an offer." Juniper looked up from the file she was reading. "An offer for what?" Beverly blinked once in a way that managed to convey mild surprise without moving any other part of her face. "For a position. I don't have any finance qualification. That was mentioned," he said, and I'm quoting directly because his exact words were unusual for him, that qualifications are what people use to find the thing they're looking for, and sometimes you find the thing before you look for it. Juniper sat with that for a moment. "What's the position?" "He'll discuss it with you." A pause. "He cleared 30 minutes at 2 o'clock. He does not clear 30 minutes easily." She went at 2 o'clock. The boardroom was empty, which was somehow larger than when it was full. Reed Ashmore was standing at the window. He seemed to think better when he was standing, with a file folder in one hand and his other hand in his pocket, and the particular stillness of someone who has decided to say something and is choosing the moment. "Sit down," he said. She sat. He sat too, which meant this was going to be a longer conversation than the ones where he stood. "Legal has what it needs," he said. "Barrett will be charged. The acquisition has been flagged with the relevant disclosures. We're looking at a fine, but the alternative." He set the file folder down. "The alternative was significantly worse. The documents you found were not peripheral. They were central. I got lucky with the elevator." "You got lucky with the elevator," he agreed. "You were not lucky with the numbers. That's not luck, that's a skill." She looked at her hands. "I never trained for it. I know. I also know that you have 14 placements across 6 years of temp work in financial administration, and every one of them, I spoke with 3 of the managers, said you had an accuracy rate that was functionally anomalous, that you caught things that their full-time staff missed." She looked up. "You called my references. You left your resume on my table. You keep saying that. It keeps being relevant." She didn't say anything. He looked at her steadily. In that way he had, like he was reading something he found genuinely worth reading. "I want to offer you a position in internal compliance review. It's new. We didn't have it, formally, before this situation made it apparent that we needed it. It pays." He named a number that was significantly more than anything she had been paid before doing anything. "Beverly will send you the full details in writing. You would report to me." She was quiet for a moment. Outside the window, the harbor was very bright in the afternoon. "I have a question," she said. "All right. Why aren't you asking someone with a CPA?" He was quiet for half a second, which for him was the equivalent of a long pause, because a CPA would have sorted that spreadsheet by filing date, he said, like everyone else, because filing date is the correct and logical way to sort it. She felt something shift in her chest, a small, unexpected settling, like a key finding a lock it didn't know was there. "I short out technology sometimes," she said. "Fair warning. I've caused 2 printer jams already in the last 4 weeks, and I'm pretty sure I'm the reason the conference room screen flickered on Tuesday. Beverly has a list of equipment protocols," he said. "She'll brief you. You already assumed I'd say yes, no," he said. And then, careful, "I assumed it was worth preparing for the possibility." She smiled. He looked at the window for a moment and then back at her, and there was something in his face that she was starting to learn how to read. The way you learn to read a city you've moved to, slowly at first, then all at once. "Also," he said, and his voice was slightly different, "the coffee machine sequence is written on an index card taped inside the cabinet door. I put it there this morning." She laughed. It came out genuine and a little surprised, which was how most of her laughs came out. He did not laugh, but the corner of his mouth did something. "Is that a yes?" he said. "That's a yes," she said. She started on a Monday. She shorted out 1 printer in the first week, but she also found a dormant billing irregularity from 18 months prior that had been sitting quietly in a subsidiary report, and Beverly Crane came and stood in her doorway and said, "Well done," which was apparently, according to the junior analyst in the next office, something Beverly had never said to anyone before. Reed Ashmore reviewed her findings at a Tuesday meeting and said nothing for a moment and then said, "Good," which from him she was learning was quite a lot. They developed a rhythm. She found things. He contextualized them. He imposed structure on what she found, and she kept finding things that didn't fit the structure, and slowly, over weeks that became months, over late evenings that became a quiet and regular pattern, over coffees made correctly from the sequence on the index card, the structure started changing to include the things she found. He told her once, in the particular late evening quiet that had become their most honest time, that when his father died, 5 years ago, quickly, which was how he'd described it, quickly, like the speed was the significant detail, he had rebuilt everything around precision because imprecision had started to feel like risk. Like everything approximate was a thing that could be lost. She told him that she had spent most of her adult life feeling like she was a half step out of phase with everything orderly and permanent, like she would never quite settle into a groove that was meant for her. He looked at her for a moment. "You're in a groove," he said. "I shorted out the fax machine yesterday." "We don't need the fax machine. You didn't know that before I shorted it out." "That's true," he said. And then, quietly, like he was testing the weight of it, "Juniper." It was the first time he'd used her first name. She looked at him. There was the harbor behind him, and the lights, and the long window, and the absolute stillness of him in that moment. All the watching and measuring and careful management of time brought to a halt, resting, looking at her. "I find it very difficult to say things without first knowing exactly how they'll land," he said. "I know," she said. "I don't have that information right now." "I know," she said again. He nodded once, slowly, like he was taking a bearing, then he said, "I think you should know that the fact that you walked into the wrong room is something I am no longer willing to call an accident." She sat with that, the number of it, the precise weight of it. "Reed," she said. "Yes. I pressed the wrong button in the elevator, you did, and I spilled coffee on your floor, you did, and I accidentally sorted your spreadsheet. Yes, and you want to frame that as the most useful series of accidents this company has experienced in its operating history." A pause. "And personally," she looked at him. He looked back. His watch said 9:47. She had started knowing the time again from paying attention to him, which was perhaps the most unexpected side effect of the last several months. "Okay," she said. "Okay? I walked into the wrong room," she said, "and I'm not particularly sorry about it." The corner of his mouth. Both corners, this time. It was not a large smile. But it was his, undecorated and genuine, and she had earned it the same way she had found every important thing in her life. Not by looking for it in the right place, but by paying attention when she ended up in the wrong one. They got married the following spring, in a small ceremony at a converted warehouse venue in Leslieville that had exposed brick and Edison bulbs and excellent acoustics, and which was absolutely nothing like the kind of venue Beverly Crane had initially researched, but which Reed had found by taking a wrong exit off the Gardner and stopping to look at the neighborhood, and which Juniper had loved immediately and completely. At the reception, his toast was 4 sentences long and contained a correctly cited statistic about probability and one very quiet joke that only she laughed at, and the precise, unadorned statement that he had not expected her and was grateful for everything that had gone wrong. Her toast was longer and wandered somewhat and included an apology to the venue's AV system, which had flickered twice during the cocktail hour. The guests laughed. Reed looked at her with that focused, occupied attention that she had learned to read and that she now understood was the way he looked at things he intended to keep. She had spent 31 years pressing the wrong buttons. It turned out some of them opened the right doors.